She was the rightful Luna, until his mistress walked into the great hall, belly swollen with the Alpha King's air. Stripped of her crown and dignity, she didn't weep. She ran. Because what the king didn't know was that she carried a secret of her own. Now, he hunts her. The great hall of Castle Dunhaven was suffocatingly warm, thick with the scent of roasted venison, spiced mead, and the feral, restless energy of 300 wolves in human skin. It was the winter solstice, the most sacred night for the Iron Peak pack. At the head of the heavy oak table sat Rosalind, a crown of forged iron and winter roses resting heavy upon her brow. To her right sat her mate, King Alaric. Alaric was a man carved from granite and winter storms, a legendary alpha whose ruthlessness on the battlefield was matched only by his supposed devotion to his Luna, or so Rosalind had believed for the past 5 years. Their marriage had united the northern territories, bringing an era of unprecedented peace. Yet, there was one shadow that hung over their reign. The royal nursery remained empty. The whispers among the pack elders had grown louder with each passing moon, muttering that a king without an heir was a king whose bloodline was destined to bleed out into the snow. Rosalind reached out, her pale hand brushing against Alaric's forearm. He didn't look at her. His jaw was clenched tight, his golden eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall. The air around him crackled with a strange, nervous electricity. Rosalind frowned. The bond between them, usually a warm, thrumming river of shared emotion, feeling suddenly fractured, blocked by a wall of jagged ice. Before she could ask him what was wrong, the heavy iron-wrought doors of the great hall groaned open. The music ceased. The raucous laughter died in the throats of the lords and ladies. The sudden silence was so absolute that the crackle of the hearth sounded like breaking bones. Walking down the center aisle was Vivian Croft. She was the daughter of a minor Western lord, a woman known for her cascading raven hair and her ambition. But tonight, it wasn't her beauty that drew the gasps of the pack. It was the undeniable heavy curve of her stomach beneath her emerald velvet gown. She was entirely, undeniably pregnant. And clinging to her, radiating outward like a beacon to every wolf in the room, was the potent, unmistakable scent of alpha blood. Rosalind's breath hitched. Her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She turned to Alaric, expecting him to rise, to demand an explanation, to command the guards to seize the woman, disrupting their sacred feast. But Alaric remained seated. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sculpted corpse. "My king!" Vivian's voice was a dark, silken purr that echoed off the stone walls. She stopped at the base of the dais, placing a protective hand over her swollen belly. She didn't even glance at Rosalind. "I have returned from the Western Territories, and I do not return alone." A low murmur rippled through the hall. Lord Harrington, a veteran of the border wars and the most vocal critic of Rosalind's barrenness, stepped forward. "Lady Vivienne!" he barked, his eyes darting between the pregnant woman and the king. "Explain yourself. Whose pup do you carry to dare interrupt the solstice?" Vivian finally looked up, her gaze locking with Alaric's. A triumphant, wicked smile played on her lips. "I carry the future of the Iron Peak pack. I carry the Alpha King's heir." The words struck Rosalind with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted. The scents of the hall, the pine, the meat, the sweat, suddenly turned rancid in her nose. She looked at Alaric. "Deny it," she screamed through their mental link, her soul thrashing in agony. "Alaric, please, deny it." Alaric slowly stood. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The great, terrifying Alpha King, who had slaughtered whole armies without blinking, could not look his mate in the face. "It is true," Alaric's voice was gravelly, devoid of emotion, but loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "The child is mine." Chaos erupted. The elders howled their approval, banging their tankards against the tables. A fertile mistress was better than a barren Luna in their eyes. Survival of the pack was the only law that truly mattered. Rosalind sat frozen, a statue of ice in a burning room. The humiliation was a living, breathing thing. wrapping its claws around her throat. She remembered the nights Alaric had held her as she wept over another negative healer's report. She remembered his whispered promises in the dark. "You are enough, Rosalind. I need no other." Lies. All of it. Vivian climbed the steps of the dais, the guards making no move to stop her. She stopped mere inches from Rosalind's chair. "The king requires an heir to secure his throne," Vivian said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You should be thanking me, Rosalind. I am giving the pack what you never could." Alaric finally turned to Rosalind. His eyes were tortured, begging for an understanding she was completely incapable of giving. "Rosalind, please." It was a moment of weakness during the border campaigns. "I didn't know. I didn't plan for this. But the child is innocent. The pack needs an heir. And what of your mate?" Rosalind's voice was a whisper, yet it cut through the din of the hall. She stood up, her spine ramrod straight. She would not let them see her break. She would not give Vivian the satisfaction of her tears. "What of the vows you swore to the moon goddess?" "You will remain as Luna," Alaric said quickly, desperate to maintain control. "Vivian will be provided for, but you are my queen." "No," Vivian interjected, her voice suddenly sharp, carrying the weight of the Alpha's child. "The mother of the future king does not cower in the shadows. I will not have my child raised as a bastard while a barren woman sits on the throne. The pack recognizes strength. The pack recognizes life." Lord Harrington slammed his fist on the table. "The Lady Vivienne speaks truth. The Luna title belongs to the one who blesses the pack." Alaric hesitated. In that split second of silence, in that agonizing hesitation, Rosalind's heart snapped cleanly in two. He was actually considering it. He was choosing the unborn pup and the mistress who carried it over her. Rosalind reached up and removed the heavy iron crown from her head. The metal was cold against her trembling fingers. She didn't throw it. She didn't scream. With a terrifying, eerie calm, she placed the crown on the table in front of Alaric. "You have made your choice, Alaric," she said, her voice echoing with a finality that made the Alpha flinch. "May the moon goddess have mercy on your reign, because I will not." She turned and walked down the dais, the crowd parting for her out of sheer shock. The rightful queen of the north, humiliated and discarded, walking into the shadows of the castle, while the cheers for the new mother began to rise behind her. The following 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture. Rosalind was not formally exiled, but she was stripped of her life nonetheless. Vivienne moved into the royal chambers of the East Wing, claiming the vast, sunlit rooms that had once been Rosalind's sanctuary. Rosalind was relocated to a drafty stone chamber in the lower keeps, a room usually reserved for visiting dignitaries of lesser houses. The castle staff, who had once bowed to her with genuine affection, now averted their eyes when she passed. The pack's loyalty was pragmatic. They followed the scent of power, and right now, power smelled like Vivian Croft's expanding womb. Alaric tried to visit her on the 3rd night. He stood outside her heavy oak door, his massive frame practically vibrating with anxiety. He spoke through the wood, his voice a pathetic imitation of the roaring Alpha he used to be. "Rosalind, open the door. We need to talk. I can make this right. I'm building a manor for her on the outskirts of the territory once the pup is born. We can go back to the way things were." Rosalind sat on the edge of her narrow, uncomfortable bed, staring at the embers in the hearth. Go back to the way things were. As if he hadn't shattered their bond. The mate bond, a metaphysical tether connecting their souls, felt infected. Every time Alaric was near Vivian, Rosalind could feel the echo of it, a dull, nauseating ache in the center of her chest. She never answered him. Eventually, she heard his heavy footsteps retreat down the corridor. But the isolation was not the worst part. The worst part was the sickness. It began subtly, a sudden aversion to the smell of roasted meats coming from the kitchens, a wave of dizziness when she stood too fast. At first, Rosalind attributed it to heartbreak. Grief had a way of poisoning the body. But when she woke up on the seventh morning and violently emptied her stomach into the chamber pot, a terrifying, impossible thought took root in her mind. She waited until nightfall to summon Maester Godwin, the oldest healer in the keep, a man who had delivered Rosalind into the world and whose loyalty lay with her family, House Artois, not the Iron Peak crown. Godwin arrived cloaked in a heavy wool mantle, his weathered face tight with concern. He performed the ancient rites, burning dried sage and resting his hands over her lower abdomen, his eyes closing as he tapped into the vital energies of her wolf. When he opened his eyes, they were filled with tears. "My lady," Godwin whispered, his voice trembling. "The moon goddess has a cruel sense of irony." Rosalind gripped the edges of her chair, her knuckles turning white. "Speak plainly, Godwin." "You are with child, Rosalind, nearly 2 months along." The room spun. 2 months. That meant she had conceived during the autumn equinox, weeks before Vivienne arrived. A hysterical, broken laugh escaped Rosalind's lips. For 5 years, she had prayed, begged, and bled for a child. And now, when she was discarded, humiliated, and replaced, she was pregnant with the true royal heir. "I must tell the king," Godwin said, standing up. "This changes everything. You are the rightful Luna. Your child will hold the true claim to the throne." "No!" Rosalind lunged forward, grabbing the old man's wrist with a grip that bruised. "You will breathe a word of this to no one. Do you understand me, Godwin? Swear it on your life." "But my lady—" "Think, Godwin!" Rosalind hissed, her maternal instincts already flaring, transforming her grief into a lethal, terrifying clarity. "Vivienne has the elders in her pocket. She has Lord Harrington backing her. If they find out I am pregnant, what do you think will happen? They will not see a miracle. They will see a threat." She paced the small stone room, the pieces clicking together. "Vivienne didn't just come to be a mistress. She wants the crown. I've seen the way she looks at me like I am an insect waiting to be crushed. If she knows I carry the true-born heir, I will be dead of a mysterious fever before the week is out. And my pup with me." Godwin's face paled as he realized the truth in her words. Castle Dunhaven was a viper's nest. A pregnant, discarded Luna was a liability no ambitious mistress would tolerate. Her fears were confirmed 2 days later. Rosalind had slipped into the castle library to find texts on masking scents. She knew that as her pregnancy progressed, her wolf's scent would change, becoming sweeter, richer. Alaric or the elders would eventually smell it on her. As she hid behind a towering row of ancient tomes, the library door clicked open. 2 voices drifted through the dusty air. "She is practically a ghost already," Lord Harrington's gruff voice sneered. "The pack has forgotten her." "Why rush the process?" "Because Alaric still pines for her," Vivienne's silken voice replied, dripping with venom. "Every night he stares out his window toward the lower keeps. As long as she breathes, she is a tether holding him back. I need his full submission before the child is born." "And the true nature of the child?" Harrington asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The cloaking spell holds." Rosalind held her breath, pressing her back against the wooden shelves. "The witch's spell holds," Vivienne scoffed. "Alaric is a fool. He smelled the alpha blood on me and assumed it was his own doing. He doesn't realize he is merely feeling the aura of the potion. By the time the pup is born and its true scent is revealed, Alaric will be dead from the slow poison I've been slipping into his mead. And you, my dear Harrington, will step in as regent to your own bastard son." Rosalind clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle her gasp. Treason! It was high treason of the worst kind. Vivienne wasn't carrying Alaric's child. She was carrying Lord Harrington's. They were using dark magic to mimic the Alpha Aura, planning to assassinate the king and steal the entire Iron Peak territory. If Rosalind stepped forward and accused them, they would demand proof. A witch's cloaking spell was virtually undetectable to normal wolves. It would just look like the bitter, barren ex-wife throwing wild accusations at the pregnant mistress. Alaric, blinded by guilt and the desperate desire for an heir, wouldn't believe her. Or worse, Harrington would just kill her on the spot to silence her. She touched her flat stomach. The tiny, fragile life inside her was the only true piece of Alaric left, the only true heir to the north. She couldn't save Alaric. He had made his bed with a viper. But she could save their child. She had to run. The plan was forged in the desperate hours of the night. Rosalind knew she couldn't outrun a pack of wolves in a fair chase. She was a Luna. She was fast. But Alaric's trackers were legendary. She needed a head start. And she needed to become a ghost. A brutal winter storm was rolling in from the jagged peaks. The wind howled against the stone walls of the keep, rattling the iron window frames. It was a blizzard that would freeze a man to death in hours, a perfect cover. The heavy snow would bury her tracks, and the freezing wind would strip her scent from the air. She packed light, a heavy fur-lined cloak, stolen strips of dried meat, a waterskin, and a pouch of silver coins. But her most crucial tool was a mixture Godwin had smuggled to her. A paste of crushed pine needles, ash, and wolfsbane root. It burned terribly when applied to the skin, but it effectively neutralized a werewolf's natural scent. At the midnight toll, when the castle was drowned in the roar of the blizzard and the heavy sleep of a drunken pack, Rosalind slipped out of her chamber. She bypassed the main corridors, navigating the servants' passages built into the walls of Dunhaven passages she had memorized during her first year as queen. The air grew frigid as she descended into the crypts. The ancestral bones of the Iron Peak Alphas rested here, silent witnesses to her flight. She whispered a prayer to them, asking for the protection of her unborn child, their descendant. She reached the iron postern gate that led out to the cliffside. It was an emergency exit, rarely used and supposedly locked from the outside. But Godwin had greased the hinges and procured the key. As Rosalind pushed the heavy door open, a sudden rasp of steel against leather echoed in the dark. "Halt!" Rosalind froze. Stepping out of the shadows was Thomas, a young guardsman with a nasty scar across his cheek. He held a drawn longsword, his eyes wide as he recognized her in the dim light of his lantern. "My queen?" he stammered, lowering the blade slightly. "I am no longer your queen, Thomas," Rosalind said, her voice steady, though her heart was threatening to beat out of her chest. She slowly pulled back her hood. "I am leaving." Thomas looked at the roaring blizzard outside the open door, then back at her. "To go out in this. It's suicide, my lady. The king has ordered a strict watch. If I let you go, he will have my head on a spike. If I stay, I am dead anyway," Rosalind said softly, stepping closer to him. She looked him dead in the eyes. "2 winters ago, your sister fell ill with the black lung. Who sat by her bed for 3 nights? Who paid for the Eastern healers to bring the root that saved her life?" Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You did, my lady." "I am cashing in that debt, Thomas. Turn around. Tell them the wind blew the door open. Tell them you saw nothing." The young guard stared at her, conflicting loyalties warring in his eyes. He looked at the proud, fierce woman who had cared for his family, now driven to flee her own home like a thief in the night. Slowly, he sheathed his sword. He reached out, grabbed the heavy iron ring of the door, and looked away. "The wind is fierce tonight, my lady," Thomas whispered. "I suspect it will blow this door shut in exactly 1 minute. May the moon goddess guide your path." "Thank you," Rosalind breathed. She slipped past him, plunging into the blinding white chaos of the storm. The cold was instantaneous and brutal. It bit through her cloak, stinging her face like glass. She rubbed the harsh ash and pine paste over her throat and wrists, fighting through the burning sensation. She didn't shift into her wolf form. A human's tracks could be mistaken for a lost traveler or a peasant, but wolf tracks leading away from the castle would instantly trigger a hunt. She walked for hours. Her legs grew numb, her lungs burned, and her eyelashes froze together. She focused solely on the tiny heartbeat she imagined fluttering inside her. "For you," she repeated as a mantra. For you, I survive. By the time the pale, weak dawn broke, she was miles away, swallowed by the dense, ancient timber of the whispering woods. Back at Castle Dunhaven, the morning brought a terrifying revelation. Alaric, driven mad by a night of restless dreams and a sudden, sharp, agonizing pang in his chest, a symptom of a stretching mate bond shoved past the guards at Rosalind's door. He didn't care about giving her space anymore. He needed to see her. He threw the door open. The room was freezing. The bed was unslept in. "Rosalind?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty stone chamber. He inhaled sharply, his golden eyes flashing as his wolf pushed to the surface. He tried to catch her scent, but there was nothing. Only the faint, stale smell of cold ash. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped his heart. He tore through the room, throwing open the wardrobe, checking the washroom. Empty. He ran into the corridor, grabbing the first servant he saw by the tunic, lifting the man off his feet. "Where is the Luna? Where is my mate?" Alaric roared, the sound vibrating through the stone floors and rattling the windows. Within minutes, the entire castle was awake. Guards scrambled, hounds were released, and the courtyard was a frenzy of activity. Alaric stood in the center of the snow-covered courtyard, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and feral. Vivienne emerged from the keep, wrapping a thick fur tighter around her shoulders. "Alaric, darling, what is this commotion? She probably just went for a walk." "Silence!" Alaric snarled, his fangs extending, his alpha aura exploding outward with such violent force that several guards dropped to their knees in submission. Vivienne stumbled back, genuine fear flashing in her eyes. Alaric looked down at the fresh snow. His tracker wolves were whining, running in circles, unable to catch a trail. She was gone. The woman who had been his anchor, his heart, the true queen of his soul, had vanished into the deadliest storm of the decade. And in that moment, a devastating realization slammed into Alaric. The mate bond, the ethereal cord connecting them, hadn't just stretched. It was vibrating with a new, terrifying frequency. A frequency of desperate, absolute survival. He closed his eyes, extending his consciousness through the bond, pushing past the blockages she had erected. And then, he felt it. Faint, distant, but undeniable. A secondary, tiny heartbeat, echoing alongside Rosalind's. Alaric fell to his knees in the snow, a sound tearing from his throat that was neither human nor wolf. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. She was pregnant. His mate was carrying his true child, and he had driven her out into the frozen wastes. Alaric's head snapped up, his golden eyes glowing with a terrifying, obsessive fire. He shifted into his massive, black-furred wolf form, a beast the size of a warhorse. He didn't wait for the guards. He didn't look back at Vivienne. With an earth-shattering howl that promised blood and ruin, the Alpha King leaped over the castle walls, plunging into the winter woods. The hunt for the runaway queen had begun. The weeks that followed were a blur of primal survival. Rosalind, now calling herself Rowan, lived not as a queen, but as a creature of the earth. She had traveled far beyond the borders of Iron Peak, deep into the forbidden Ethelgard range, a place where the mountains bit the sky and the forests were thick with ancient, predatory spirits. She slept in shallow caves, her body curled around the growing life within her, acting as a human shield against the biting cold. Every night, she performed the ritual Godwin had taught her, burning the remaining ash and wolfsbane to mask her scent. She knew Alaric was hunting her. She could feel the phantom pressure of his presence in the back of her mind, a relentless, icy pursuit that never quite caught up. Her body was changing. The pregnancy, which should have been a source of joy, was a source of constant danger. Her appetite had become ravenous, and her wolf, once dormant from years of stress and heartache, was clawing at the surface, demanding to be let out to hunt. One evening, while scavenging for wild tubers near a frozen creek, she stumbled upon a small, isolated cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, the only sign of life for 100 miles. Exhausted and weakened by the extreme cold, Rosalind dared to approach. The door opened before she could knock. Standing there was a woman with hair like spun silver and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the stars. She was an elder, a seer of the lost northern clans. "I have been waiting for you, little wolf," the woman whispered, stepping aside to let her in. Her name was Isolde. She recognized the scent of the Iron Peak royal line, but she also smelled the decay of the deception Rosalind carried. For the next 2 months, Isolde became her guardian. She taught Rosalind how to quiet her mind, how to hide her scent without the harsh application of herbs, and, most importantly, how to prepare for the birth of a child who was not just a pup, but a carrier of the Alpha's bloodline in its purest form. "He will come for you," Isolde warned one night, as they sat by the fire. "Alaric of Iron Peak is not a man who gives up on his prey. But you must ask yourself, Rowan, when he finds you, will he be the king who betrayed you, or the father who has realized the magnitude of his sins?" "He made his choice, Isolde," Rosalind replied, her hand tracing the curve of her belly. "He chose the lie over the truth. He chose the mistress who promised him an heir over the mate who offered him love. I will not be a trophy," he reclaims to soothe his conscience. Meanwhile, the hunt had changed Alaric. The regal, composed king was gone. In his place was a beast in human skin, his armor rusted, his beard long and unkempt, his eyes perpetually rimmed with bloodshot fatigue. He had discarded his crown at the border of Ethelgard, refusing to return to the castle even as his pack turned on each other in his absence. He was guided by the scent, a faint, lingering trace of jasmine and winter air that he followed with the tenacity of a starving animal. Every time he felt close, the scent would vanish, masked by the clever traps Rosalind laid river crossings, backtracking, and the biting cold of the mountains. But Alaric's obsession had blinded him to the rot back home. In the Iron Peak Keep, Vivian's grip had tightened. She had seized control of the treasury and begun purging the court of those loyal to Rosalind. Lord Harrington was no longer a shadow advisor. He was the de facto ruler, issuing decrees that sent the pack into a frenzy of aggressive expansion. The air Vivienne carried was becoming a rallying cry for war. But the dark magic had a cost. The potion that masked her belly's true nature was failing. The pup was not growing with the strength of a wolf-born. It was fading, and the life force required to keep the illusion alive was draining Vivian's vitality. She was frantic, poisoning the local wells to maintain her own strength and ordering the execution of any healer who whispered that the pregnancy was unnatural. Back in Ethelgard, the time of the birth approached. The winter began to thaw, and the air grew thick with the promise of spring. Rosalind's labor began on a night when the moon was full and blood red. "It is time," Isolde whispered, clearing the table for the birth. The agony was intense, a fire that burned through every nerve in Rosalind's body. She bit down on a strip of leather, refusing to scream, her wolf howling within her in primal rhythm. As the final push came, a surge of raw, untamed energy flooded the cabin. The walls rattled. The wind outside seemed to stop entirely. When the babe finally drew its first breath, it didn't cry. It let out a low, vibrating chuff, the sound of a young wolf testing its voice. Rosalind collapsed, sweat-drenched and trembling, as Isolde placed the bundle in her arms. It was a girl, with a tuft of hair the color of midnight and eyes that, even in the dim light, glowed with the unmistakable, brilliant gold of the Iron Peak dynasty. "She is magnificent," Isolde breathed, "a true daughter of the moon." But the joy was short-lived. The cabin door shuddered, as if struck by a battering ram. The lock splintered. The cold mountain air rushed in, and with it, a scent so familiar, so devastatingly potent, that it stopped Rosalind's heart. It was Alaric. The heavy timbered door of the cabin did not just open. It splintered inward with a violent crack, torn from its iron hinges by a force of pure, desperate physical power. The freezing mountain wind roared through the breach, carrying swirling snow and a scent so overwhelmingly familiar, so devastatingly potent, that Rosalind's heart completely stopped in her chest. It was Alaric. But the man standing in the ruins of the doorway was barely recognizable as the legendary Alpha King of Iron Peak. His once gleaming armor was rusted and missing plates, his thick fur cloak matted with ice and dried mud. His face was hollowed out, the cheekbones sharp as knives beneath a thick, unkempt beard. He looked like a phantom, a hollowed-out shell driven forward by nothing but instinct and a threadbare mate bond. His feral, bloodshot eyes swept the small room, instantly locking onto the blood-soaked linens, the exhausted frame of his mate, and the tiny, squirming bundle held fiercely against her chest. The silence in the cabin became absolute, save for the howling wind outside. Alaric took one stumbling step forward. The great, terrifying warlord whose name made rival kings tremble across the northern territories suddenly collapsed. He fell hard to his knees on the wooden floorboards, his massive shoulders shaking. "Rosalind," he choked out. The single word sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. "Take another step, Alaric, and I will tear out your throat," Rosalind hissed, her voice vibrating with a sudden, lethal ferocity. Her wolf, amplified by the protective instincts of a new mother, surged to the surface. Her eyes flashed a dangerous, luminous amber. She pulled the infant tighter to her chest, shielding her from the man who had discarded them. "You have no right to be here. You gave up that right on the solstice." Isolde stepped forward, a silver-bladed hunting knife appearing seamlessly in the elder's hand, but Alaric didn't even look at the weapon. He kept his eyes pinned to the floor, his hands gripping his own hair in a gesture of pure agony. "I know," Alaric wept, his voice cracking. "I know I destroyed everything. I have lived in purgatory these past months. Every day, the fractured bond between us felt like a rusted blade twisting in my ribs. I followed your ghost across 100 miles of ice. I thought I had lost you forever. I didn't know about the child. By the moon goddess, Rosalind, I swear to you, I didn't know." "And if you had," Rosalind demanded, her voice dripping with venom, "would you have kept me as your Luna just to secure your legacy? I will not be a vessel for your crown, Alaric. She is mine. She is the daughter you never asked for, and the heir you do not deserve." Alaric finally looked up, his golden eyes swimming with tears. "There is no crown anymore, Rosalind. There is no legacy. Iron Peak is broken." Rosalind's grip on the blankets loosened fractionally. "What are you talking about?" "Vivienne is dead," Alaric said, the words falling from his mouth like heavy stones. He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. She was never pregnant. There was no alpha heir. The healers finally cut through the cloaking spell last week when she collapsed in the Great Hall. It was a blood leech curse. She was using dark magic to mimic the scent of life, feeding off the vitality of the pack's youngest wolves to keep her vanity and her false belly swollen. The magic turned inward and rotted her from the inside out. Rosalind stared at him, stunned. The kingdom she had bled for, the pack she had loved, brought to its knees by an illusion. "Lord Harrington tried to stage a coup when the truth came out," Alaric continued, his voice void of emotion. "He tried to claim the throne in the chaos. The elders tore him to pieces. The pack is fractured, warring in the streets of Dunhaven. They are slaughtering each other for the scraps of a kingdom I abandoned to find you." "You left them?" Isolde spoke for the first time, her silver eyes narrowing. "You abandoned your pack?" "They stopped being my pack the moment they cheered for my mate's humiliation," Alaric snarled, a brief flash of his old alpha fire returning before it drowned in sorrow once more. He looked back at Rosalind. "I don't care about the throne. I don't care about the Iron Peak title. I only cared about you. I came to ask for your forgiveness, not your return. I came to beg." He slowly reached out, his calloused, scarred hand trembling as it hovered inches from the swaddled blankets. Rosalind hesitated. The mate bond, which she had forcefully kept numb for months, flared to life, singing with the undeniable truth of his remorse. It wasn't a trick. He was utterly broken. Slowly, she shifted her arms, pulling back the heavy wool to reveal their daughter's face. Alaric's breath hitched. He stared down at the tiny face, at the tuft of midnight hair. As if sensing her father's presence, the infant opened her eyes, revealing a brilliant, luminous gold that mirrored his own. Alaric let out a broken sob, leaning forward to press his forehead against the floorboards at Rosalind's feet. The journey back towards civilization was not a triumphant return. There were no cheers, no banners. When they finally reached the borders of Iron Peak, they found Castle Dunhaven, scarred by fire and infighting. But Alaric did not march into the Great Hall to reclaim his seat. He stood in the snowy courtyard, dressed in common leathers, and summoned the surviving elders. With Rosalind by his side, he officially abdicated the throne. He stripped himself of the Alpha King title, handing governance over to a ruling council of the people. He refused to let his daughter inherit a legacy built on deceit and bloodshed. Instead, Alaric and Rosalind traveled to the deep valleys near the Whispering Woods, claiming a modest stretch of untamed land. Their reconciliation was not a fairy tale. It was a grueling, terrifyingly fragile process. There were weeks of bitter arguments, of long nights where Rosalind wept from the lingering trauma, and days where she could not bear the sight of him. But Alaric stayed. He proved his devotion not with royal decrees, but with blistered hands. He built their cabin from the ground up. He hunted for their meals. He stood guard through the darkest winter nights, earning back her trust one agonizing inch at a time. The betrayal had burned their old life to ash, but in the quiet solitude of the valley, from the embers of their shattered bond, a new life took root, one forged not by the absolute power of a king, but by the relentless, humbling devotion of a father and a mate. The path to redemption is rarely paved with easy choices, and for Alaric and Rosalind, it was forged in the fires of loss and betrayal. Their story is a reminder that even the deepest wounds can be healed by the slow, deliberate work of forgiveness and the unbreakable bond of family. If this tale of the Alpha King and his lost queen moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with a fellow storyteller, and subscribe for more epic sagas.